first I'll state the question as it is, and then I'll add a change to it. It says, how can we help poor whites feel allied with a, quote, movement instead of threatened by it? And the reason why I want to expand it is that a lot of times there's a kind of a focus on poor whites, as if the issue is not an issue that affects whites of all class. And so the question that I want to ask you in that same context is, and it's to state it in a positive way, how can the professional mass incarceration, race, criminal justice industry, I'll call it, the nonprofit incarceration and industrial complex, which is, as we would expect, overwhelmingly dominated by whites and underrepresented by people of color in a movement that's supposed to deal with an issue that mostly affects them. So the question is, how can this particular group be made to feel comfortable as being a part of a movement, knowing that people of color should play not only a key role, but a bigger role than they currently play in this?
Well, again, as I said before, I think everybody needs to play a role. Everybody needs to play a role in building the movement and have, a voice in the movement. In the first chapter of the book, I describe kind of the organizing that occurs between poor whites and former slaves and the descendants of slaves and during the populist era. And what enormous success the populists were beginning to have in joining poor and working class whites and blacks in the South in a challenge to the plantation elite and the industrial elite, the railroads, etc., arguing very explicitly, look, there are divide and conquer tactics being used against us. You are being fleeced and asked to trade, your economic rights for white racial privilege. And those kinds of arguments did work to build solidarity between poor and working class whites during the populist era and a movement for economic justice. The way in which that interracial alliance was decimated was by proposing disenfranchisement laws aimed at blacks. That's where Jim Crow laws came from. It was part of an effort to drive a wedge between the growing alliance between poor and working class whites and former slaves in the South. And they found that by, waging these highly racialized campaigns seeking to disenfranchise blacks, they could persuade poor and working class whites to abandon their former allies, and whites were persuaded that they could achieve more in terms of their economic justice goals if they let go of the group that had been demonized, and many believed that they were at risk of being disenfranchised as well. And it would be better to make it purely a racial system of control as a result of the backlash that was emerging against the populist movement. And I think today, as you see with the Tea Party and other kinds of examples of white mobilizations where they, in fact, are denied health care benefits, denied economic justice and opportunity, and made themselves find themselves unable to access drug treatment because of lack of availability or lack of access to health care, that there's an opportunity once again to show how people of all colors are in fact being harmed by a system that has been born of our racial divisions and anxieties and these divide and conquer tactics. So I think our organizing has to be explicit when we're reaching out to poor, working class white folks of all colors, to say, we need to join together precisely because when we don't, and we are divided, these kinds of systems of oppression and marginalization and denial of basic human rights winds up affecting us all. So I don't think we can do it in a colorblind way by kind of sweeping under the rug our racial differences and the histories which have brought us to this moment in time. I think much like in the populist era, when those organizers were speaking very explicitly to whites, about the need to join with African Americans in a movement for economic justice, we have to do something very similar today.
I wish we could go on, but sadly we have to come to an end for this part of it. So please, round of applause, Michelle Alexander.
The reason for mass incarceration in an age of full of blindness. Please pick up a copy at the back table and get it signed. And most importantly, get involved in some kind of way or another. If this group will do it, who will? Thank you.
Now on to the auction. Please go over and look at the items there. Oh, I'm sorry.
I gotta just say,